Most farmers open a project's app, connect a wallet, and start clicking through quests. They never open the tokenomics page first. That's backwards, and it's the first mistake I see in almost every farm I look at. The tokenomics page is where a project tells you, in actual numbers, how much of its token goes to users, how that pool is split up, and what mechanisms it's built to filter out exactly the kind of multi-wallet activity a farming operation runs on. I run proxy farms and cloud phone farms for a living. Dozens of devices, hundreds of wallets, real infrastructure with real monthly costs attached to it. I don't farm projects on vibes. Before I commit a single proxy or a single cloud phone slot to a new project, I read the tokenomics page the same way I'd read a contract. Because reading it doesn't guarantee me anything about what I'll eventually receive, but it tells me whether the setup is even worth the infrastructure I'd be pointing at it. Here's why that page comes before the ops plan and not after. A farming operation has real costs. Proxies cost money every month. Cloud phones or VMS cost money every month. Wallet generation and funding takes time and capital. And then there's the actual labor, hours spent clicking through quests across dozens or hundreds of addresses. None of that gets allocated to a new project until I know three things from the tokenomics page. Those three things are how big the pool set aside for the community actually is, how that pool is split between farmers versus other categories like liquidity mining or ecosystem grants, and what mechanism decides how each individual wallet's share gets calculated. If a project hasn't published those numbers, or if the community allocation is just marketing language with no percentage tied to an actual token contract, that's information on its own. It usually means the project hasn't finalized distribution yet, or it's not planning to publish anything until after farmers have already burned time on it. The first number every tokenomics page shows you is total supply, and most also show circulating supply at the token generation event, or TGE. Those are not the same number, and mixing them up is the single most common misread I see. Total supply is every token that will ever exist under the current issuance rules. Circulating supply at TGE is what's actually liquid and tradable on day one, which can be a much smaller slice. A community or airdrop allocation is usually quoted as a percentage of total supply, but the tokens you can actually claim at TGE are often a smaller fraction of that allocation, with the rest locked behind a vesting schedule. Reading the headline allocation percentage without checking the TGE unlock percentage gives you a distorted picture of what actually shows up in a wallet when the airdrop happens, because the number that matters for planning is the smaller one, not the bigger one on the summary line. Here's what that math actually looks like when you run it with real numbers, and I mean a hypothetical example, not a specific project. Say a token has a total supply of 1 billion, and the page lists an 8% community allocation, which works out to 80 million tokens on paper. Then you find the TGE unlock is only 25% of that allocation. So the amount actually reaching wallets on day one is 20 million tokens, split across however many wallets end up qualifying for it. If 10,000 wallets qualify, that pool works out to 2,000 tokens each before any further vesting. If 100,000 wallets qualify instead, that same pool works out to 200 tokens each. The point isn't the dollar value, which nobody can predict. It's that the tokenomics page is the only place with the numbers to even run that arithmetic. Next, I look at where the airdrop or community allocation actually sits in the breakdown, because projects use these terms inconsistently. Some have a dedicated line item with a hard percentage attached, something like 5% of total supply, reserved specifically for a retroactive airdrop, named as its own category. Others fold airdrop rewards into a broader community and ecosystem bucket that also funds grants, marketing spend, and future incentive programs, which means the actual airdrop slice could be a fraction of the headline number. When a project names a specific token amount or percentage tied to airdrop as its own line, that's a firmer number to plan an operation around than a percentage buried inside a catch-all bucket. Vesting doesn't only apply to team and investor tokens. Community and airdrop allocations get vested too now, more often than they used to, sometimes with a cliff, meaning a delay before any tokens unlock at all, followed by linear unlocks stretched over months or years. If a tokenomics page shows a 6-month cliff on the community allocation, that's telling you something concrete. Farming this project now means that if a payout happens, it sits partially locked for a long stretch afterward. That's a real operational input, not a minor footnote. It changes how I weigh the hours I put into a project against a different project offering an immediate unlock with no cliff at all. I'm not saying which one is worth more. I genuinely don't know and won't guess, but knowing the vesting terms before I start is very different from finding out after I've already claimed and the tokens are stuck behind a lockup I didn't plan for. I also compare the community and airdrop percentage against the team and investor percentages, and I check the vesting terms for both groups side by side. A table where insiders hold a large share with short lockups sitting next to a community allocation with a long cliff isn't unusual in this space, but it's worth registering as a fact about how the supply is structured. It's not a verdict on the project, and I want to be clear about that. The tokenomics page doesn't tell you what's going to happen to price, and I'm not going to pretend it does or guess at a number for you. It tells you how supply is structured, which is the part that's actually knowable in advance, and that's the only part worth reading it for. A lot of current airdrop farming doesn't run against a fixed tokenomics table at all. It runs against a point system or a quest score that a project says will convert to tokens later at a ratio and a total pool size that doesn't get published until closer to TGE. When all you can see is a points leaderboard and no draft tokenomics anywhere, you're farming against an unknown conversion function, full stop. Some projects do publish the formula ahead of time, and when they do, I read it exactly like I'd read a tokenomics table. It might be a fixed pool divided proportionally by points earned across everyone who qualifies. It might be a tiered system with diminishing returns past a certain threshold, so your first few hundred points are worth more than your next few thousand. Either way, that formula tells you how your farmed activity maps to eventual allocation, and whether it rewards concentrated effort on fewer wallets or wide activity spread across many. The same logic applies to a points program, so let me put a number on it too, again hypothetically. A project runs a quest program for 6 months, farmers rack up points for bridging, swapping, and holding, and at the end the project says a fixed pool converts to tokens based on your share of total points earned across everyone. If the project never says how big that pool is or what the conversion ratio might be, you're accumulating points against a complete unknown, and no amount of extra quest activity tells you what that activity is actually worth in the end. That's the exact gap a published formula closes, even a rough one. This is where tokenomics design and Sybil detection actually connect, and it's worth understanding how it works even if you never touch the mechanics yourself. Projects that got burned by Sybil farming in past cycles now bake countermeasures directly into the tokenomics or the points formula, instead of relying only on wallet clustering after the fact. One common mechanism is a diminishing or logarithmic point curve per wallet, so the 10th quest completion on a single address earns much less than the first one did. Another common mechanism is a hard cap on allocation per address, regardless of how much activity that address racked up. A third is a minimum threshold before a wallet even qualifies at all, something like a minimum transaction count, a minimum holding period, or a minimum amount of gas spent. None of these require a project to figure out which wallets belong to the same operator. They just make concentrated farming on one wallet mathematically less efficient, which is exactly why real operators run many independently funded wallets instead of pushing everything through one address at high volume. Separate from allocation curve design, and often layered on top of it, projects run on chain clustering against the eventual snapshot. That means grouping addresses that share funding sources, transaction timing patterns, or behavioral fingerprints, and excluding clusters that look coordinated. A tokenomics page usually won't spell that process out in detail, but its existence tends to get signaled indirectly through phrases like Sybil-resistant distribution or subject to eligibility review sitting in the allocation notes. When I see language like that, it tells me to treat wallet independence as a genuine operational requirement for the farm, rather than an afterthought bolted on at the end. That means separate funding paths for each wallet, separate proxy assignments, separate device fingerprints, and separate timing on quest activity, all planned into the operation from the start, rather than something patched in after a snapshot already went badly. It's ops thinking applied to a page most farmers skip past entirely. Not every project has finalized tokenomics before farming opens, and that's not automatically a red flag on its own. Plenty of legitimate projects run points programs well ahead of any token generation event, because the token itself doesn't exist yet, but the absence of any published allocation structure means you're farming on trust that a fair conversion shows up later, with no way to check the math today. So I weigh that against the actual ops cost of farming the project, wallet setup, proxy and device allocation, and the hours of quest activity across however many addresses I'm running. A project with a published specific community allocation and a visible points to token formula gives me something concrete to plan an operation around. A project with neither one gives me a bet on a number that doesn't exist yet, and I treat it that way when I'm deciding where infrastructure goes. Reading the tokenomics page is a 5 to 10 minute step, and it happens before wallets get funded and before quests get assigned, never after. It won't tell you what a token is going to be worth, and it won't tell you whether a project is going to deliver on its stated allocation at all. Those aren't things this page can answer, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What it will tell you is how big the pool is relative to expected participants, how locked up any eventual payout would be, and what kind of distribution mechanics you're farming against, including the ones built specifically to filter out coordinated wallets. That's the information an ops-minded farmer actually needs before pointing proxies, cloud phones, and hours at a brand new project. And farm these the boring, methodical way and write up what actually qualifies. The full guides and the tools I trust are at airdropfarming.org. Full written guides and tested toolpicks at airdropfarming.org. Go check them out and subscribe if this kind of breakdown is useful to you.